Is this how we're being taped?
Well, there's a camera back there. I think that's just to get like the close up.
Oh, gotcha.
Like, say
'Cause
hi,
that's
like,
really close.
Yeah, it's really like intimate. That's the intimate cam.
That's the teeth cam.
Yeah, right. Hey guys, thanks for coming. We have a very special guest today. We got Ross Richie from Boom Studios. He is one of the founders of Boom Studios and currently the big cheese there, right? You're the head CEO.
I like to say it's my fault.
It's all your fault? And do you take blame when things go wrong? And
I don't have a choice.
Okay, all right. Cool. Well, so as you guys know, I mean, it's your first meeting, but there's a lot of actual people that make comics. There's aspiring comic creators out there. There's people out there on the fence thinking, do they want to do this sort of thing? And it's our job to convince them it's a good idea. Okay. And this is an open forum, guys. You know, I tend to run off at the mouth, so if you want to chime in, you know, raise your hand, and if that doesn't work, yell. And ask Mr. Richie questions while we have him here today.
Sure.
We'll talk for about 90 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to you guys to, have at him. You scared?
No.
Okay, good.
Even a little
cool.
bit.
So I guess the best place to start is the beginning, and tell us a little bit about your background, how you discovered comics, and
Sure.
what sort of led you to this path.
Well, the first comic book that I ever got was in an Easter basket, and it was Fantastic Four 178, which was, I think, 1976, which means I'm old.
No, you're not. That was just the other day.
You're being very kind. And it was written by Roy Thomas and drawn by George Peros, and it had the Fantastic Four. And what I always like to say is there's a lot of conventional wisdom that comic books are inaccessible, and that's one of the reasons why they're not more widely read. But I remember being 6 and looking at the corner box, and it said 178, and I thought, wow, if that means that there's 177 before this, I have to read every single one. And it was also like, I want to say the 5th part in like an 8-part story, and it had the Frightful Five, and the most confusing thing for a 6-year-old that could ever be possible, which is there's Reed Richards, but there's a parallel Earth version of Reed Richards that turns into the Brute, and if you're not really up on your Marvel history,
I don't remember the Brute.
The Brute is the Hulk, but he's purple.
Oh, okay. But it was Reed Richards?
It's Reed Richards from Counter-Earth.
Okay.
So think of
like a mirror thing.
For your DC continuity, it's like Earth 2. They were clearly doing an Earth 2 thing, and so like as a kid, I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, so the hero has like a supervillain version of himself that turns into a purple version of the Hulk. Right, and I was like, "This is fantastic."
So it was accessible for you.
Well, all I wanted was more characters in it, and it had a gazillion, Tigra and Thundra, and I mean, it was ridiculous. There are probably 18 superheroes and supervillains in the comic book.
I think before George Perez agrees to draw a comic, he wants at least 200 characters in it.
Well, he's like the only artist that I'm aware of that really wants to show a ton of characters when he draws things, because he draws from a fan perspective, which is, I love seeing all these characters on screen together, like, in action. So the Easter basket had that, and it also had in it Captain America comic, which I think was 207, which was the second time that Kirby drew the book. So Kirby came back around the bicentennial in 76. And
he started at 193, and he ended
Mad Bomb Saga
around that time. Yeah.
And so, like, Remender's homaging a lot of his stuff right now, and that book had Nazis putting people in ovens, and it gave me nightmares.
But not like ovens like Nazis used, more like Kirby ovens.
Kirby ovens, yes, absolutely. Well, there was no ability for Kirby to draw anything but Kirby ovens, and it was absolutely horrifying. And then like the style that Kirby had that was so like powerful, and the inking, I think it was Royer, and it was so thick, like just for my 6-year-old sensibilities, like it was terrifying. And so if that had been the only comic book that I'd gotten in that Easter basket, I think I would have been turned off.
Wow.
And with the Fantastic Four, it like opened up this, whole universe of characters, and like from there on out, I was hooked. And it was all about, for me, it was like, how many odd jobs, how do I earn money so that I can go buy a comic book? And when I started to buy them, they were 35 cents. And so I used to have this deal with my parents that if I did things around the house, I'd get 2/3 of a comic book. So
it's like 20 cents?
yeah.
20, oh,
Yeah,
wow.
they wouldn't even give me a quarter.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
And so I was just like, you know,
Which
that
really
house was
primed
in
you for
great
a
shape.
life in independent comics, you know?
Well,
yeah. So.
Right on the money. Yeah.
But so were you a Marvel zombie then through the 70s and 80s? No.
No, I've always been really voracious in my interest and varied, and I think you see that in the kind of stuff that we publish at Boom.
Mm-hmm.
And so, instantaneously, as soon as I find out, oh, there's Marvel Comics, I want to go out and read one of everything, even the war books, you know. And then it's like, oh, I want to go check out all the DC stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like the only thing I wouldn't buy is like Conan the Barbarian. I just didn't get it.
Right.
And then, you know, as soon as I found out that there were other publishers, like the second gateway in my fan experience was I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and there was a local convention in the mall.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time that I ever saw a back issue or had any sense of like, I remember I couldn't comprehend that, because I'd never been to a convention, so I didn't understand what the idea was.
Mm-hmm.
It blew my mind that like the entire mall was filled with people who had back issues.
Yeah.
And so I stopped at the first booth and like spent like 2 hours at the first booth because I thought that was it.
Wow. That's how I met you, was at a convention. You were going through back issues, so you're still doing it.
No,
awesome.
I still love it. You saw me rooting around in your Amazing Spider-Mans. And at the core of it, I still remember my mom coming to pick me up, and she's like, you know, you're in the same place. Didn't you see? And it was like that Hitchcock shot where you zoom in and you know. I was like, what? There's all this stuff. So I ended up with they had a subscription to the Comic Buyer's Guide, and the way the Buyer's Guide used to get you is like, hey, it was a weekly,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a newspaper that they mailed to you, and it was like, hey, you can have the first 4 issues for free, and just fill this out and send it in. And so I did that, and as soon as I got that just, you know, that was a mind blower, and I was probably like 13, 14. And so at that stage, it gave me access to independent publishing. And this is, you know, before Miracle Man #1.
Yeah.
And so this is, you know, I got hooked on First, Eclipse, and Kamiko. Those were all my...
Grendel and Mage, and I think you're...
Grendel and Mage were huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They were huge, huge, huge. I bought Grendel #1 off the rack. I still have it, you know. And it was, that whole experience was just totally mind-blowing. And so then to get into the Comic Buyer's Guide, where fandom was really focused,
Mm-hmm.
this is the pre-Wizard days, and to read all the letters and sort of all the columns and catch up on all the history.
I remember the checklists.
Yeah,
and, like, putting
totally.
little X's in my...
Yeah. It was huge. It was huge. And so after that, I was pretty much done. And I was a huge collector, and then I around about 86, I was 16, and I got my driver's license, and I started to date girls, and I didn't have any money for comics, and so I basically quit comics. And like one of the last things I bought was the first issue of Watchmen. And so I still remember like reading I was a big Alan Moore fan, and I bought Miracle Man, and I bought a Swamp Thing pretty much when he started, so I was like way in on Alan early on. But the first issue of Watchmen, I completely did not understand, because it was just I think there was something about the 9-panel grid structure that just really threw me, and its tone. And so anyway, I got out of comics, and when I went to college, then I had some roommates that had heard me talking about comic books, and so we were on a road trip, and we stopped for gas, and I think I was taking a nap in the back of the car, and when the car pulled away, it was like Slim Jims, a full tank of gas, and a Jim Lee X-Men comic book. Wow. And I looked at that, and I was like, I immediately had to know, you know, what had happened to all of the X-Men, and so I was back in.
So Jim Lee brought you back in, pretty much. Oh, that's interesting. Does he know that?
Oh no, I've never talked to Jim.
Hopefully he watches this and does a cover for you guys or something. That'd be nice, right?
Well, that would be great.
So you're okay. You're a college stoner eating Slim Jims, reading comics in the back of a car. Okay. What was your first comic book gig? What was your first professional?
Sure. So this is so Mark Waid has a joke about becoming a comic book professional, and it is that as soon as somebody figures out how to get into the business, the business turns around and like cements closed that wall that you broke down, so that like nobody can ever replicate that way to get in again. Okay.
It's all like possums.
Yeah, infestation.
Yeah.
So my situation is going to sound like really ridiculous to people, where I had moved from, grew up in San Antonio, went to school in Austin. I come out to Los Angeles in '92, and I work, I had aspirations to work in show business, and so I work as a production assistant, on a bunch of movies, and, you drive Wally Shawn around, and
Who's Wally Shawn?
Ha! Are you serious?
Does anybody know?
Yeah.
Princess
Bride?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, cool.
Yeah, never started land war in Asia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Anyway, so he was a great character actor. So so I go do that, and I'm living on my credit cards, and there was a convention that was put on that I think this was Randy Martin, Laura Martin's husband, who's a big original art guy, did a show in Riverside.
Okay.
And it was like a one-time show. They never did it again. And Malibu Comics set up there, and I ended up talking to one of the guys at the booth, and he said, hey, they were trying, this is very, very bizarre, they were trying to do a straight-to-video model with VHS tapes where...
Firearm, right?
That's right.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. And so back in the day, for the people who don't know, back in the day you had Blockbuster and 2020 Video, and video stores were exploding, and people were buying video cassettes as well. And so the idea was, hey, what we'll do is we'll shoot low-budget action films based on our characters, and we'll sell them in the comic book market, and we'll sell them in the video store. And so the concept ultimately didn't work because the direct market really didn't order.
It was like $20, I think.
Yeah,
back then, right?
yeah. It was like everybody looked at that and was like, "You're crazy."
Yeah.
And so it didn't work. But the guy that had directed it, they had done a teaser trailer for Hardcase. I had gone to film school, and when I just sort of was looking at the video and was like, "Hey, how did you do this?" It was 35 millimeter, which was, would be unheard of for anybody outside of Hollywood to be able to do that at that time. And he was like, how do you know the difference between 16 millimeter and 35? And we kind of got into a conversation. He was like, hey, there's an opening in the marketing department. Do you want a gig? And I needed to pay my bills. Oh. And I said yes. And I had no particular interest in marketing. And I kind of thought, I'll get this gig. I'll get a couple of paychecks under my belt and get myself sort of righted on my bills, and then I'll start looking for other work. And it turned into that, crazy situation where comic book sales were, it
was a good time.
Insane. And I was very, very lucky. The company was exploding, and, on a head count, it was probably 5-6 times bigger than Boom is today. And they were hiring people so fast that they didn't train you. And they basically turned around and said, okay, all of the retailers west of the Mississippi are yours. Never mind the fact you've never worked in a comic book store. And every single convention that we do, you're setting up. And this was back when there was 18 distributors. There were so many distributors that they actually had a convention for the distributors to talk to each other.
Really?
It was called IAD, the International Association of Direct Market Distributors.
And these are all comic distributors?
Comic book distributors,
okay.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like, just for fun, the next time you get a 1980s back issue of Cerebus, look, usually on the back cover or inside back cover, he printed the different distributors that were carrying his book. And you'll see some names that you've never heard of before.
All gone now.
All
except
gone.
For Diamond.
All gone. Just one.
Yeah.
So anyway, set up the booths and did, took care of the signings and, just did that stuff. So.
Now, did you study marketing in college, or did you have any credentials that they were like, this guy will set up booths for us? And
well, part of the thought process, in defense of Tom Mason, my boss, not to hang him out to dry and make him seem like a complete fool that he would hire me, it was the thought process was I had worked as a production assistant on commercials in TV shows and movies. And when you do that, there's a certain rigorousness that you need to have in regards to logistics. And so the problem that they had in that position prior was that a lot of creators would go to a convention and the logistics of their plane flight were screwed up, their hotel room wasn't reserved, nothing went smoothly. And so the idea was, here's a guy who really, really, really knows comics, and he has the logistical ability to plug this hole that we have right now. And then I think they thought that I had the ability to talk to retailers as far as like, just pick up a phone and cold call them. And
how did that? Richard and I talked to retailers one day a couple weeks ago. How'd that work for you?
Well, back in the well, it's interesting because it's different how it works now.
Yeah.
Because
I hope so. I don't know.
Well, it's a mixed bag. Back then, comic books were selling so well that everyone kind of had a grin on their face.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of desire to do signings, and at signings you could get 500 people, and there were huge events, and it was the industry was just in this golden age. And so talking to retailers, and also Malibu was a huge publisher. The thing that people forget is they had 18 Ultraverse comics. So, and then they on top of that had things like Bravura, which could have been a company on its own with like 6 to 8 titles.
That was like the creator-owned stuff, right? Like Breed and Star-Lord was there, right? Or not Star-Lord, what was Dreadstar?
Yes, Dreadstar.
Star
and,
Slammers.
Star Slammers, Power and Glory. It was a great line. I love Strike Back. A lot of great books there. But it was a gigantic company. And so there was also that a lot of retailers were super excited that anybody from as big a company was giving them a ring, and so it was a much easier conversation to have. And I think nowadays, it's the reverse, where it's like when I was a young guy in my 20s, there was a degree to which I think in the early 90s retailers were making a lot of money, and they didn't want to shoot me on sight because they didn't run the company. It was a way to say, hey, if you could tell your bosses, and I would sit down and compose an email of like all the if they said negative things, all the stuff. And whereas now it's like, oh, I have the guy that runs Boom in my store, I'll just detonate on him now. And so
that's not going to happen here. No, but I'm going to talk bad about retailers real quick. I hope they're watching. When we were making those calls, it's just like I feel like there's this guy just waiting for their phone to ring just so he can like yell at somebody. About how sad his life is, and it's tragic, really. But whatever.
Hey, look, I think that when you work in comics, it's when I think about through my life to do something creative, whether that be when I was getting a film degree, or I was the guy in your high school class that drew pictures. Everybody all the adults are all designed to tell you can't do this. They're trying to save you from the heartbreak of failure, right?
Right.
And so every day that I get up, whether to me it's like if you're working at Diamond in distribution and maybe you're doing logistics and it's not very creative, or you're a retailer where you're on the front lines of where the industry is, or you're a publisher, like let's all be happy, thrilled, and thankful that we do what we do. And what I love to say is it beats working. Because like my dad was an electrical contractor, and when I was in junior high and in high school, I dug ditches.
So you worked.
I grew up in South Texas, where it's like I can tell you the difference between 108 degrees and 109 degrees, and 110 and 111, and there's a huge difference. Okay, the difference between like 99 degrees to 107, not so much. But once you get up to 108, it gets brutal.
That's when you're digging ditches, though. Like it's he's a Texan too. I don't know if you can tell by looking at him, but
awesome. Which part?
Similar.
Grew up in El Paso with
wow.
UT.
Yeah.
He never dug ditches, so he never worked.
Yeah.
I did, actually.
So anyway, when you do that, I'm like, any day that I worry about imaginary things, that's a good
day, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So now, did you, you got the job in marketing in Malibu. I guess we could talk a little bit about them getting absorbed by Marvel. Were you there during that time? And
yeah, absolutely.
Were you like, how did you wind up leaving? Did you leave on your own?
Yeah, I quit, and I guess it's been so long I can say some of these things.
Oh yeah, let it out. There's a whole book about Marvel: The Untold Story.
I read it cover to cover. I thought it was fantastic, and I really highly recommend it. I think Sean did an amazing job. I don't know him, but I sent him a Facebook message, and I think that book is the very first account that I have seen that got the Malibu acquisition right.
Oh, okay.
And that includes any website I've ever read.
Are you in the book? They talk about you in the book?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
So tell us what happens. Tell the untold story of Ross Richie and quitting Marvel.
Well, the original people that were going to acquire Malibu was DC. And, DC, I think a large part of them acquiring Wildstorm was because the Malibu acquisition didn't happen.
Okay.
And so, and they had Milestone and Vertigo had been successfully launched. And so they were demonstrating that they had an ability to do different content than the DC universe and be supportive of that. Mm-hmm. And so I looked at that and thought, that's really exciting. As a guy that grew up reading indie comics, to me, it was such a pinnacle to be at a company that was successfully publishing independent comic books like that. And a possible acquisition from one of the majors, I was disinterested in Marvel and DC relative to being a career destination, because there was a way in which I felt like they had already kind of built it, right? So it'd be one thing if hey, there's this guy and he's crazy and his name is Stan Lee, and he's got 2 people in this office next to him, and Jack Kirby's coming in and they have these big dreams. That would be exciting. Yeah. Right? But 30 years after, when they're this gigantic global titan and hundreds of people work there, well, then you're just a drop in the bucket, and so with DC, I was like, oh, this is cool because they could preserve Malibu's personality and make them distinct and different, because you don't want to just be doing more, hey, there's 4 Superman books, let's do 8. Right. It was like you could have a distinct place. And then when that changed and Marvel came in very strongly on a financial level to really come in heavy. And there's 2 motivations to do that. Number one is you block DC from getting it, and then the other thing is, and this has kind of been lost in the sands of time, is that Marvel at the time was planning to buy a distributor, which was the 3rd biggest distributor, which is Heroes World. And their plan was, if you remember back in the 90s, part of the idea was there were Warner Brothers stores that were focused on selling Bugs Bunny and Tweety, and there were the Disney stores. And so Marvel was feeling like, well, we have these universally recognizable characters. We just had this very successful X-Men cartoon. What if we did a mall store that was focused like those stores, but also carried comics. And then we could have more control over our retail presence. We could be vertically integrated. We could have a profitability because you're not just selling a $2 comic. You're
selling
wholesale
shirts and everything else. Yeah.
Right. So they were planning to do that, and part of the thing that they had figured out was the saturation point that they had hit was that they couldn't sell more Marvel books. And I always call this the Midnight Suns moment. Because people who were there remember that, when Doctor Strange and Ghost Rider were put in with some other characters like the Darkhold were put into sort of their own imprint, and that was kind of the moment that everybody kind of felt like, well, we're really kind of stretching this idea of creating these families of characters, and they were like, okay. And I remember Terry Stewart, the CEO, specifically saying to me, we have hit the point where it doesn't matter what book we put out. They're not going to order it because we've hit our market saturation point. But if we buy another company, it's a Marvel comic book, but on the cover it's not. And so there's not pushback. And the real numbers come down to roughly, and I'm going to be off a couple of percentage points here, but Marvel was 50% of the market when the Image partners were at the company. When Image left, they fell to 35%. Malibu was at a 12% market share.
Image was part of Malibu at first, right? It's important to point out.
That's right.
Malibu brought Image.
The first year of Spawn, if you look on the inside front cover, it has a Malibu logo on it because basically Malibu distributed Image and helped set them up. So basically what they were doing was they were going out and buying the market share that they had lost. And Marvel was a publicly traded company at this time. This is pre-bankruptcy. And so if you go back and read the press release that they sent out, it basically says, Marvel went and bought the company that started Image.
But Image was no longer there anymore.
But Image was no.
Yeah.
But those investors don't know that.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, yeah,
because they're not paying.
They're not
that,
reading the comics or paying that close attention.
And all they know is the Image founders left, and we lost a third of our market share, and our stock price went down. And then, these smart guys went out and bought the guys that started Image, and made your stock price go up. And was
there something about the printing press too that you guys had? Was the reason they bought? Okay, all right.
Everybody printed in Sparta.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the same place. Everybody focuses on the coloring, and it's ridiculous. The computer coloring that Malibu did was cutting edge, but you could, if you're Marvel Comics and you think that that's valuable, what you do is you fly out to California and you set up meetings at the local IHOP with all those colorists, and when they walk in, you go, I'll just pay you twice as much as Malibu's paying you. Okay. And every single one will, you just take all that talent. You don't need to buy a company to get that. So.
Okay. Who, you're going to say something else, or
no?
Okay. So you leave Malibu, and you just.
Oh, right. So I was kind of looking at the DC acquisition makes a lot of sense. That has a lot of potential. Marvel's never had success acquiring other companies. It's really the company that Stan built, and it's never understood how to do stuff that's not its core business. We could debate that, but that's how I felt at the time.
No, I think so. They tried to do like a Vertigo type thing, and it's never worked out for them. So,
I mean, they do superheroes better than anybody in the world. So so basically, I was like, okay, this is going to not go well. Like, the way that it ended up going for Malibu was completely unsurprising to me.
Oh, really?
And I felt like that's how it would happen. And so I was basically like, I need to plan my exit strategy. And what my exit was I had a boss that had been a talent agent. And so when Men in Black, so Malibu published Men in Black, we knew it was getting made into a movie. And The Crow had come out and The Mask had come out. And they were these big hit movies. And so these producers that my boss used to work with were all calling him and saying like, hey, these comic books look like they could be good movies. Do you have any comic books that you think would be good movies? And my boss was fed up with everything. And he was basically at the place where during the acquisition where he was like, hey, I'm going to go move to Europe. And he moved to Prague, and he still lives there. Yeah, he just completely reinvented his life, just, left. And so he was like, could you please talk to these producers that are calling me because they're bothering me and I don't care.
I want to be in that spot in life, right?
What's the Henry Ford is the luck is preparation meets opportunity?
Okay, not perspiration.
Yeah, maybe I'm getting my Henry Ford quotes mixed up. So anyway, so that it was a great opportunity, and I was like, look, I have this kind of thing where my boss has given me his Rolodex, and this is an opportunity to meet people that, I could source comic book content for, and so I quit and went to go chase that.
Now, do you think that because we're talking about, your triumphs as well, that period, I think
want to focus on the failures.
We're going to talk about that too. But that, I think that, you stepping into that role, it's probably informed you now as the publisher of Boom, like in what properties you think are worth pursuing. And I mean, do you think that was an educational period for you?
Oh, it's extremely educational. It's funny because, Paul Levitz has recently, joined the company in an advisory capacity and as a consultant. And one of the first things, Paul's this industry legend. Industry legend's not enough to cover Paul. And so we're having this conversation early on because we've had a lot of success in Hollywood. And Paul says, tell me what's your attitude and philosophy with Hollywood. And I was like, Paul, I'm Rorschach in Watchmen. There's that moment,
Herm.
Yeah. I was like, there's that moment when Rorschach gets captured by the cops, and what he says is, you think I'm stuck in here with you, but what you don't get is you're stuck in here with me.
Okay.
So to a certain degree, I'll kind of fast forward down the timeline to hit the punchline. I go out and pitch a bunch of stuff. Some things sell, some things don't. I work with a bunch of different producers. I get to know the studios, and I'm like, this is such a gigantic waste of time and this incredibly frustrating process. I mean, now, I'm going to speak to all the comic book fans. How many things that we love to read as comic books have been optioned as movies, and you've never seen the movie?
Yeah, 90%.
Like 99%,
Yeah.
right? So there's all of this cash and focus and time and energy that's being used in the feature business that never sees any outcome. Okay?
Yeah.
And I was right in there. I was in the 99%, right? And I was like, man, I'm getting older and nothing's happening and this is so frustrating and everyone says such nice things and they don't mean any of it and this is just like crazy. This is nuts. And so when we can break down the steps that happened to Boom, but broadly my plan was I'm going to start Boom to get away from Hollywood.
Okay.
And so the first day that I publish Hero Squared Exercise Special #1, it comes out in comic book stores, and my friends that were producers went to the store and bought Hero Squared and called me. And that day, my phone rang off the hook with producers. Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is a terrible plan to get away from Hollywood.
Yeah.
You know? And that triggers the Rorschach response, which is that, because I have a publishing business, like Hollywood has this attitude of like, hi, I'm going to talk to you about your comic book that you own, and you're so lucky to talk to me.
Yeah.
Because I can make all of your dreams come true, right? And I'm the guy that's been in 2,000 failed pitches and a fair number of successful pitches, and I'm like, I don't care. I have a company over here where like 4 people can make something physical.
A comic
that
book.
Thousands of people love. And it pays my rent. And I don't have to go to a meeting where everybody says they love me and they don't mean it. I don't have to go spend, 200 hours of like 3 years on something that at the end of the day the studio goes, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, or one executive rolls out of the company and then nobody else cares about your project.
Right, yeah.
That's what happened to Poison, the band.
Oh, gotcha.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's, but yeah.
So at the core of it, for me, I'm more in a position where it's so funny because we'll get through the Boom contact form on the website. We'll get these emails where it's like, I'm a producer and I like your comic book, and I'm just like delete, because you have a successful publishing business, and at the core of it, I think that a lot of that energy is misspent. Obviously, there's a lot of good people in the film business. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on all of them, but there's a lot of waste of time. And at the core of it, I found being tough-minded with that crew has great success, because too often creators or publishers are trying to go after that, and they'll fall for anything,
Right. Well, we've talked about this at the group too. People that have screenplays that they're trying to get optioned or whatever, and then so many people take that route of turning it into a comic book.
Yep.
Now, is that something that you would say Boom has done? I mean, a lot of your publications are high concept. So
let's talk about high concept, because I think that there's a couple different things that have really influenced me as a publisher, and I think that at the core of it, it's one of the things that makes Hollywood want to buy Boom books. Okay. So the first book is Whiteout that Oni published.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And I remember really distinctly when that book came out, it was really mind blowing to me, because previous to that, a kind of a police procedural like that would have had superpowers in some way. It would have felt like it was at the core a detective story, but that they had made some sort of compromise where they were trying to cater to a comic book fan, and so they would
supernatural element.
Right, that it was shoehorned in. And what I loved about it was the courage of like Greg Rucka as an emerging talent, doing what he does well. Steve Lieber, who's a veteran of the business, showing that he could draw really amazing regular people in regular clothes. And it was such a confluence of great stuff. And the story was grounded and relatable. And, like, if you asked earlier if I'm a Marvel or DC guy, I have as many DC comics as I have Marvel books. But I do think when it comes rubber meets the road, not as what I'm reading as a fan, but what I'm drawn to as a professional, is if I'm going to set a story, I'd rather set the story in New York City than Gotham City.
Okay.
Because I've never been to Gotham City and I've been to New York City. And so the relatability or the accessibility of the story, so more grounded stories are more attractive to me because I feel like I can relate to them better.
Okay.
And I'm not the guy that is in that mode of, like, I love Grant Morrison's work, but a lot of times, like, I might be in, like, a Jack Kirby story, like in The New Gods, where it takes place in such an abstract world that I'm looking for some sort of, like, the way that Stan and Jack used to have Thor walk through a soda fountain in New York City, and all the regular people in New York City going like, that's Thor! Like, I loved that. Like, the Fantastic Four were in a place in New York City instead of a magical land that you
The
never
world
been
outside
to.
your window, I think, is what it used to call it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so Whiteout, the next thing is, Why the Last Man.
Okay.
Very grounded, very relatable, fantastical, but you think that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, I used to think it would be, until I read the first issue, I was like, oh, it sounds like paradise, but oh no, every month he has to run for his life as the world menstruates, It's crazy.
Yeah. And then the next thing is, I'm just going to let that go. Then the next thing is 300. 300 book I bought off the rack, which is so mind-blowing, where it's like my joke at Boom is, when I die and go to heaven, I hope go to heaven. So when I go to heaven, I'll be a French publisher of comic books, because you can publish historical, like, fiction
Albums.
of all kinds. You can do military comics. I'd love to do war comics. Like, one of my dreams is, like, to do a World War II comic book as, like, a 60 issue thing. Like, so to me it was like, those three books were very, when you look at them, they're very high concept.
It was Whiteout. What was
Whiteout and 300.
300. Okay. Yeah.
And so there's a high concept quality. Now, I grew up. My mom had a store on the Riverwalk in San Antonio, and she had it was not a comic book store, but it was a gift shop.
Okay.
And so, when I was 15, I would stand behind the counter, and when you walked in the store, there was an opportunity, and I think you'll be able to relate.
Okay.
Right? You can establish eye contact, you can say hello, okay? Then you say, how are you doing? And if a customer responds, at that point, you have an opportunity to sell them something.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for spilling all my secrets. No, just kidding.
But your value proposition's a little different relative to a comic book store.
No, it's true.
But, like, what we would do at next to the cash register is you would have a low-cost impulse item, if it was shiny or had movement of some kind, that could draw the eye. And so when someone walked in the door, I had this wound up, whatever, and I had a line. And the line needed to be short. Okay? So, like, if the person walks in, you say, hi, how are you doing? Doing great. Have you ever seen...
Okay.
Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And, if I have a wind-up toy, or it's some sort of, we had a silver seagull thing, and it was like, at that juncture, and that's high concept.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you have the ability
something flashy and, yeah.
Right. Well, think about, so let's put it in comic book store terms, right? Why the Last Man is the easiest comic book to sell on the racks. Because you say to your customer, like, this story's about what if every guy on Earth died.
Right. It's an easy sell. It is an easy upsell.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. And it's high concept. And so for me, I'm sitting here and I'm starting Boom, and I'm thinking, like, I'm screwed, right? Because I've worked in comics, and I know how many companies have gone out of business. Like, me and my friends, when we were at Malibu, used to look at the guys across the aisle that were starting a new comic book company and be like, are you insane? Right? I mean, we could rattle off the huge list. And so I thought...
There was a guy in Florida that... CrossGen, yeah, those guys, yeah.
That was one of the more successful. Like...
Well,
it's staggering how many, like, like, look at Dreamwave, look at Devil's Due, look at, like...
Virgin.
Right, and we're just sticking to the aughts here.
Wait, Atomica.
Yeah.
Oh, we won't talk about that.
Yeah, sure, we'll talk about Atomica. So, at the core of it, it's like, okay, I'm screwed because I don't have a shot, because look at the noise that's in the previous catalog. And I don't mean this in a pejorative way, look at how much competition there is in your store.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so how am I going to put something on those racks that stands out? Right? And so one of the ways that I could do it is the first comic book I put out had a Dave Johnson cover. Because, you go over to Dave Johnston's house and you play Xbox, because I knew Dave when he was starting and I was starting and we were just friends, right? So I can leverage my Rolodex, which is, the first issue of Zombie Tales has a story from Mark Waid because he's a pal, right? But the other way that I can leverage it is, my joke with the first book I published, Zombie Tales, was, Zombie Tales, guess what it's about? Right?
Right.
So whenever you see stories, particular Boom books, that have really clear titles, it's usually my fault.
Oh, you're the one that says...
because I'm like, Zombie Tales, it's about tales of zombies.
And this is before the big zombie madness wave that you guys were, about 3 or 4 years too early on that one.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
So. Well, it's so great for us and really set the company up. But at the core of it, it's when we talk about this is all going back to the Hollywood thing. So I think Hollywood loves high concept, right? Mm-hmm. And so Hollywood comes in and says, "Oh, I clearly understand this idea." The Two Guns, for instance, is what I always used to say with Two Guns is, two thieves walk into a bank. What one thief doesn't know is the other guy's an undercover DEA agent, and what the undercover DEA agent doesn't know is the other guy's undercover naval intelligence. Okay.
So they think they're both,
Right. So they steal $35 million from this bank, but what they don't know is they didn't steal $35 million from a drug runner, a Mexican drug runner. They sold $35 million from the CIA, and the CIA wants them dead. Right? So it's very simple, very clean, high concept, and Hollywood's attracted to that. From
now,
the
Stephen Grant wrote that, right?
Yeah.
Now, that was his? It was all his idea and everything. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Awesome.
So that I think at the end of the day, Hollywood is attracted to high concept, and I think high concept sells comic books. Like we have copies of Loki, Ragnarok, and Roll here, where it's like, very clearly, and we'll get to Eric in a minute, as we'll talk about breaking into the business, and I think Eric's a good example. But if you're selling copies of Loki, Ragnarok, and Roll, it's because you can simply say, hey, this is the sort of like punk rock version of the Norse god that you already know. Yeah. Right? And so if you're reading Thor, you don't want to read another version of Thor that's really similar to what you're reading. Right. Because you already have the Marvel version, right? So if you're going to do a different version, you're going to make it something like from Eric Esquivel, where it's crazy and he turns himself into a goth rock punk.
I sell it to metalheads, like anybody would, like David here. I would say, hey, check this out.
Yeah, there you go. So that and so I guess hopefully high concept helps sell books.
Yeah, I think it does. And I want to just mention too really quick, there's certain publishers, and this isn't a bad thing about them or a good thing about Boom or vice versa, but I have found that it helps to shelve all the Valiant books together, like Harbinger, Eternal Warrior, and all that. Yep. And then Aspen, another publisher in LA. I put their books together because when we put them on the shelves in their separate places, they kind of fall, the numbers fall. But Boom, I can't shelve Boom books together. They have to go and again, I think that there's something to be said about books, companies that do something that's so cohesive. They kind of strengthen the numbers thing. But it's good that you're able to, do things that are different and, experiment. Not everything hits, but...
Right. But it's my interest where it's like, I'm interested, I consume many different kinds of things. And so I like comedies, I like dramas, I'll watch a rom-com, I'll watch Lord of the Rings, I just like a lot of different kinds of things, and so as long as it's good, and you try, some things work, some things don't, but you gotta try.
How long was Boom around before you felt like, okay, this is working?
Wow, that's interesting. I really felt like only last year was it really.
So 8 years or 7 years?
8
wow,
years,
okay.
7 years, yeah. I mean, the way that it was in my mind, what I wanted it to work like.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, how did you keep going through? I mean, I don't know if Boom has always been profitable or not, but the years that it wasn't, let's say.
Sure.
How were you able to keep moving forward financially and just inside yourself?
When you have a store, it's like when I will tell you, January 2011. The market was down 20%, all the way across the board, and that was a really hard month for us. And, you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
It's you've pulled the trigger, you're pot committed, and you got to figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah.
And when you're in a place where, financial constraints hit, you got to be resourceful and inventive. And the people that give up, they're not around.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Cool. Anybody have any questions out there? Back here. Hey, Omar, what's up, dude? Omar's a comic creator.
Cool.
Nathaniel and Xenoglyphs.
Yeah, I started my own company recently, and I just kind of, was saying that you had about 8 years before like the company was able to kind of sustain itself and stuff like that.
Well, that's not what I said. I said.
I said that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, it wasn't the sustainability. It was more like I think you said you feel like you'd not made it, but like.
Or like how you envisioned it, like things how you thought it would be going, or how did you keep going? Yeah. Sort of.
Yeah.
When it wasn't working the way you
last year,
it.
I felt like I was like, we're in a groove, and like this is what I always wanted Boom to be.
I kind of just I had a question of like, where did you like kind of start? Like, what was like your transition? I'm a little bit late, so I apologize. But like, I wanted to know like where you started from, and then how did Boom kind of come about?
Well, so there's going to be a video you can watch later to catch some of that. But we did miss a chapter that I do want to address really quick. Because you left Malibu and then you did the Hollywood thing,
right?
And then I think what
you want to talk about Atomica?
So let's talk about Atomica. What brought you back into comics was Atomica, which was about a year before Boom, right?
Well, there was a step before that. What brought me back into comics was Image.
Image, okay.
Yes. So, so through the years, one of the things I would do because of my experience in Hollywood was I used to go to conventions and tell creators, if someone from Hollywood wants to option your comic book and turn it into a movie, and you don't know about the deal that's being offered to you, I'm happy to give you a free, impartial, third-party perspective on it. Mm-hmm. And, the truth of the matter is that a lot of creators, what you always think about is like, is this property your Star Wars, right? Mm-hmm. And, not all of George Lucas's ideas were Star Wars.
Right.
Right. And so a lot of times it's hard for a creator to understand that or see that. And, I was able sometimes to be a voice to a creator where I was like, hey, how much do you care about this comic book? Is this huge to you? Like when you talk to Matt Wagner, he has two things ever. It's Grendel and Mage. They're flip sides of the same coin.
Yeah. And
he's very knowledgeable and specific about emotionally and financially what those creations mean to him. But to other creators, I could say, hey, this is a graphic novel. This is a 4-issue miniseries you did in 1984. Mm-hmm. It's never been collected. It's really kind of a footnote on your career. You went off and are known for 5 other things that are far bigger. Yeah. The offer that you're being offered is not the best in the world, but it's not terrible.
Right.
So maybe this is not a bad opportunity, or this guy's trying to rip you off, or, oh my God, take this, sign it now. So that's how I met Keith Giffen. And so Keith and I struck up a friendship, and he would call me, and if you don't know Keith's work, I really encourage you to check it out.
He's a funny guy.
One of my heroes. And I think one of the things that's really distinct, since we're talking about comic book creation, is Keith is a guy that in the 1970s was seen as a very significant artist who was very, very hot, one of the big artists of the day. Then in the 80s, he migrated and became a writer. He broke into comedy, then changed and reinvented himself. And I always talk about, like, Aerosmith is this band that in the 70s was this thing, and then in the 80s did Walk This Way and completely changed their audience, mm-hmm. and then in the 90s they became like the Armageddon band. Like they were always like changing, and longevity in entertainment of any kind is exceptionally difficult. Having a huge album, there's a lot of people that have a huge album. There are not many people that have huge albums, right? And Keith is a guy that has huge albums. So Keith calls me up. We just struck up this friendship, and we would just kind of shoot the breeze talking about stuff. And Keith calls me one day, and he says, "I'm going to do a comic book for Image, and you're going to write it." And I was like, "Well, Keith, there's a problem with this plan because like I don't write." And Keith was like, "I'm going to do this comic book at Image, and you're going to write it." I was like, Keith, I just kind of feel like you're not listening to me. I'm not a writer. And really, I promise you, I've tried to write stuff, and I am just really world-class awful. Like, you are not prepared for how much I suck.
Really? That bad?
Oh, I am awful.
A lot of people don't recognize that, and they just write stuff.
Oh, yes. I am
it's good
aware.
You recognize your limitations.
No, I'm married to a writer, and she'll even tell me how awful my work is.
Do you think she's just, like, debilitated you? Like, maybe it's pretty good, but your wife just tells you you suck all the time?
No. There's a lot of third-party authentication of my sucking.
You're bad. Okay.
So then Keith says, well, I'm going to do this book at Image, and you're going to write it. I said, okay, Keith, here's the thing. I'm going to tell you one more time that I'm terrible, okay? And then what I'm going to say is, one of my heroes just called me up and said, hey, do you want to do a comic book with me? And so my answer to that is yes. But the thing is since you're such a good writer, when I suck, not if, you get to rewrite me. And it will not hurt our friendship because I know I suck. So you're not stepping on my toes.
That's good, yeah.
So, and of course, sure enough, that's what happened. I,
what was
sucked,
the book?
And it's called Dominion.
Okay.
And it was launched the same month as Invincible. And Image was doing a superhero initiative, and there were a couple other projects in that that you might be familiar with. Fire Breather was a part of that initiative. And then there was another book called Venture that Jay Farber did.
They had like the Vigilante logo, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Just like Vigilante.
You're a logo guy.
Well, I just remember that one.
Yeah. It's a good V. Good V is hard.
It's a good V, yeah.
So,
did you do that? That wasn't your fault, was it? Okay. Vigilante, that works.
So anyway, so I did that book with Keith, and the guy that inked the second issue was Dave Elliott.
Okay.
And so I struck up a friendship with Dave Elliott, and Dave called me, and Dave had published, had a publishing company called Atomica that he had formed with Gary Leach, and Gary is known as the co-creator of Miracle Man. And so they had launched a publishing company in the late 80s called Atomica, and he calls me up and he's like, hey, I have all these trades from back in the day and I'd love to put them back in print. Do you know anybody that would be interested? And I was like, sure. So I called up my friend William Christensen at Avatar. I think I went to Eric Stevenson at Image. There was Oni, and I just went to all the publishers that I knew that I had relationships with. And no one was interested in, like 9 months go by and nothing happens. And so I was just driving around LA one time and I called him back. Let's take a step back and say, the material that he was offering to put into trade paperbacks had Alan Moore content. In 1989, there was this young writer that nobody had ever given a chance to. His name was Warren Ellis. There was another young writer that nobody had given a chance to named Grant Morrison.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a murderer's row of the greatest in the business. And so I'm driving around in Los Angeles going, okay, I know distributors. I know how to publish a comic book. I've never done it before. But, like, if you're going to publish a comic book, how you make sure that it isn't a complete failure is you put Alan Moore content in it. Right?
Right.
I was like, I'm not going to... The question is not, am I going to make money? The question is am I going to screw it up so that I burn all the money that I make? Right? So, and so that was Atomica, so helped Dave and Gary bring Atomica back. And then... Keith came to town for a convention, and Keith said to me, I really think you're pretty good at this. And Gary and Dave have other things that they want to do relative to publishing different kinds of content in different ways. Why don't you go do this yourself? And, Keith was very encouraging to me. I was like, Keith, you can't launch a new comic book company. There's no way. Atomica is a brand. It's not the biggest brand in the world, but it's been associated with some really significant creators. Nobody can start a comic book company. That's crazy talk. And Keith just kept giving me beer and was like, start your own company, start your own company. Yeah. And so I woke up the next day and I thought, if one of my heroes is telling me that I should do this, I should give it a shot. And so I called Keith back and I said, okay, so I don't know that it's good news that I'm taking your advice, but I will tell you that the bad news is now that this is your idea, like the first 6 things that we're doing, you have to create. So like get going, so that I won't lose my shirt. So.
And you started Boom with Andrew Cosby, right?
Andy was a partner, but not a founder.
Oh, okay, he was not a founder. Okay.
Yeah.
And he created Eureka.
He co-created Eureka.
Co-created Eureka.
Yeah, with Jamie Paul.
How did you guys finance the launch of Boom?
Well, I basically You know, it was here's the secret to publishing. And this is another example of how you break through a wall, and the comic book industry like seals the wall so you can never come back through. You have Dave Elliott offer to do all the files to reprint an Alan Moore story.
Okay.
So you don't have to write a check for that. And if you call up Diamond and you get them to distribute your book, which was easier for me because I knew people there from when I was at Malibu, so I could just pick up the phone and call and say, "Hi, would you like an Alan Moore comic book?"
Right.
So the answer to that is yes.
Yes, obviously.
Right. So solicitation, the Diamond catalog is free.
Okay.
So you just need a 300 DPI 2-inch by 2-inch image.
You didn't run an ad or anything?
No.
First? No.
I don't think so. I have to go back and look. I think we might have gotten a free ad out of them. Hey, would you like an Alan Moore comic book? And then the orders are all non-returnable.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll notice certain people solicit things in the Diamond catalog, and their orders aren't high enough, and they never ship the product.
Mm-hmm.
It's because they haven't spent any money.
And sometimes Diamond, I guess, cancels the orders even when the book is done, I heard. But
well, if you don't get enough orders. But to follow through for me is I got a purchase order, and I knew how much money it was, so that then all you had to worry about was covering the print bill, but you could show that invoice to your printer.
Right, but what about the artists and writers and people that worked on the book?
It was reprint material.
Oh, it was all okay, cool.
Right,
Yeah.
so that got me started.
Gotcha.
And then like another book I did was the Dave Johnson sketchbook, which is basically you go over, drink beer at Dave Johnson's house, play Xbox with him,
It's painless.
and on the coffee table there's all this stuff that nobody's ever seen before, and you're like, Dave, this is amazing. Richard's laughing because he knows this is amazing. Like, why don't you put this into a book? And Dave looks at me and goes, I don't know how to do that. And I'm like, "Ba-bing!" and it was like, hey, the money will come in and we'll split it 50-50, and you
Nice.
just knock on Dave Johnson's door and are like, here.
Here's
So,
a check.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So that was the meager beginnings of Boom.
Yeah.
Then of reprinting Alan Moore.
And the key, of course, at that point is on just a financial basis. I was in a place where I was not trying to rely on any of that money. I could roll all of that money back into the business.
Mm-hmm.
So
Do you have like a day job or something, or?
Yeah, I
Okay.
used to read screenplays as a reader.
Okay.
Yeah.
I always tell the creators here, like, I don't tell them, well, yeah, don't quit your day job, but that doesn't mean don't do what you want to do. Don't make your comics. But it's good to, I think that is the spirit of independence, is where you're not beholden to people, and you go to work, and then on the side you scratch that creative itch.
Well, you gotta chase your dreams.
Yeah.
So there's a story about Billy Tucci, the creator of She.
Mm-hmm.
So the story is that he bought an ad for She, speaking of buying ads in the previous catalog, and solicited the first issue, and was so convinced that he had failed that when the orders came in spectacular for the first issue, Diamond couldn't find him to tell him the good news.
He was at work?
He had basically is just like, "Wah!" And he was working for someone else. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's like an example of nothing ventured, nothing gained. But it was also tells you how worried he was. And I think if you're good, I would love to be the guy that's like, this is genius and it'll all be perfect. I can't. I'm the guy that at 1 a.m. is like, what have I done?
So, talk a little bit about like at conventions or whatever. I mean, what do you have a process for, like, how do you look at projects for Boom? How do you consider books for Boom? If somebody wanted to approach Boom about pitching their book to you, or is there a sort of a step-by-step thing they should do, or?
Well, the answer for Boom and for Archaea are different.
Okay.
And so Archaea is a place that new creators who've never done anything before can break in.
Mm-hmm.
And so the good example of that is Rust. Well, hell, there's no better example than Mouse Guard.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But Rust specifically, so at the Archaea website, there's a form that you can fill out that says, that sort of gives legal clearance to Archaea. And basically, you submit the work that you've done already on spec. to basically be seen and considered for publication. And so Royden Lepp wrote and drew Rust, which has gone on to be very successful for Archaea, and submitted it through the contact form on the Archaea site.
He just did it all and then sent it. Okay.
Well, I don't know
Or
that he did it all, but he did a lot of, a lot of it. Now, for Boom, we're less that place to get started. You know, it's the thing, the inelegant way to put this is that, you know, you're in a place at Boom where you're competing against Mike Carey for what our publishing slots are. Or, you know, you look at the guys that did Planet of the Apes, where it's Gabriel Hardman, who's writing stuff for Marvel, and Daryl Gregory, who's a successful novelist.
Right.
And
I noticed a lot of, like, there's a lot of, like, almost like the Firesign Theater at Boom, where Michael Allen Nelson does a lot of books for you guys, and it's almost like a stable of creators that you tend to work with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's obviously guys like Gabriel are super talented, and we're going to look for other ways to work with them. And with, you know, Mike Carey, that's a guy that, you know, you want to continue to have a relationship with. But it's at the same time, it's like, you know, if you're a new creator breaking in, you know, I think that doing what you did, like you gave me a comic book before we started this.
Yeah.
And why I wanted to bring up the Loki Ragnarok and Roll stuff was Eric Esquivel created a comic book with Moonstone that I think was print on demand. I don't think it ever got solicited. I don't know. But basically, he went to a panel that our editor-in-chief was at, and after the panel, gave him the print on demand comic just like you just gave me. And that served as something that he brought it back. Is that's an example of somebody who broke in, who didn't have a lot of work behind him. And so I think that I know from, and again, you know, the answer for Archaea and for Boom is different, but I know for Boom, part of it on an editorial basis that we're looking at is, you know, it's hard as a creator who's starting out writing to understand this. So much is unproven for you. So, will you meet a deadline? Like, you're sitting there thinking, oh yeah, definitely. Some of the greatest writers in the business with the greatest longevity have a hard time hitting a deadline. So, you know, someone who's inexperienced in doing it for the first time, you're a huge question mark, you know, and a risk. And there's a lot of money that goes behind ad placement and all the branding and marketing and all the push that we put behind something that could fail.
And if your book is late, then stores can send it back too. So there's that.
And you love late books in your store, don't you?
You know, I don't worry about it. I make comics. I don't get upset when people are like.
You're the only guy.
Yeah, I'm the only
retailer that
That's
doesn't
the
mind.
good thing about being on both sides of the fence. Like, oh, it's a couple weeks late. It'll be fine.
So at the core of it, you know, there's a certain number of things that you can do as a writer that solves question marks for a publisher. Another example is you can be a really, really good writer who doesn't understand how to write a script for an artist.
Right.
So I can have great character development, I can have excellent ideas, but I don't know how to uncork it for an artist where I'm tapping into their strengths. And so part of, you'll hear stories about, like, you know, I can't think of more divergent writers than Jeff Loeb and Neil Gaiman, that both of them would call up their artists before they started to write and ask their artists, what do you like to draw? And then would figure out creative ways to integrate those things into their scripts so their artists are motivated.
Right.
And so, you know, going through the necessary steps of writing something, giving it to an artist, seeing the pages come back terrible, right? Trying to think, oh my God, this is going to be a disaster and we're all going to die in a hurricane. How do we get out of this? And so, you know, like with Eric's submission, we could see that he had gotten through a number of those barriers and had emerged with, wasn't, you know, like, we didn't read it and it ripped the top of our heads off, but it had a voice and a vitality that was unique.
Right.
And had something that was special and different that we thought, oh, you know, we could give this guy a shot and see what he does. And And I think that when you go do that comic book on your own, that's a bit more of the small press variety. Let's be real about other things. It shows that you'll work on spec, which is commitment and focus. It means that you can project manage. We're going to manage the project. But if you've project managed before, you might have some appreciation for how hard it is. So, and then you might not be a prima donna, and you might not be hard to work with.
Right.
Which is big. There's a lot of very talented guys. We'll go through, before we go to a convention, we'll all sit in a room and do a list, and somebody will bring up somebody's name, and we're just like, we love this guy's work, and we actually like him personally, but like he's just really hard to work with, and there's just not enough tea in China to make this worthwhile.
Look at that face.
I think he hates you.
No, we have a love-hate relationship.
What's the?
No, he's my assistant editor on the anthology that we did.
So
but I think that what you just said is probably the best thing. What'd you say?
I said that just really means editor.
Yes. Thanks, David.
What's the saying is men insult each other and don't mean it. Women compliment each other and don't mean it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's like was it Gran Torino? That scene in Gran Torino when he goes in. Did you see that movie? Yeah. I think that was fabulous information. Sorry it took an hour to get to it. No, I'm just kidding. No, but that was great. What you said, and there's some writers out there. I'm a writer, and it's challenging. Like, how do you demonstrate to the comic book industry, a visual medium, what your abilities are? And I think that was really.
Yeah.
I mean, I took that to heart. So
well, cool. Well, look, the other thing is. On you're going to hear an entrepreneurial thing from me, shocker, right? But it's like, if you have the ability to put together content, there's the web, and Facebook and Twitter, and even getting 300 people that are following you for your comic book shows that you have a greater degree of sophistication and understanding of how the business works and what ridiculously hard work it is, right? And so, like, you could sit there and go, well, if we, hire this guy, 300 more people will buy it than if it was just a standalone boom book, So there are those different steps, and the other thing about it is, like, if there's an area of publishing that I look at and I'm completely fascinated by. One day I might wander out of the back of Boom and just go do this, and everybody will be like, "Where'd Ross go?" But I love
that country where your old boss was.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I'm in Prague. But the web stuff I just think is so exciting.
Is it?
Absolutely. Yeah. To me, it is. The numbers that these guys are getting are real. Like, you look at the creative crowd that we've engaged on Adventure Time. And how outside of you have people going into direct market comic book stores that read comic books that have never been in a comic book shop.
Right.
And so the reach and the ability, the pass along quality of, like, hey, I liked this, go check this out, or emailing it to your friend of, like, you've never seen something like this before. Like, it's a very interesting, intriguing, and on top of it, to see, like, these things get collected and sold through direct market comic book shops and on Amazon, and so the web component doesn't preempt the print component.
Do you feel that it only works with comedy, though? You think web comics?
It's funny because you sound like part of my staff, and I don't think so.
No.
No. I mean, I think I think it's nerds, right? So it's like, I'm a nerd, and, like, if I love something, if I'm engaged by it, then I'm gonna follow it.
Okay.
And I'm in and I'm committed. And maybe you're right, but there's no.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of an example of something other than, like,
right,
PvP and I love Dr. McNinja. I read it as a trade, but I'm a print guy. It's like, you put all this work into it, and it's like, it's sad that it just becomes a website.
I love print. But from a creative, really sort of the origin of the conversation is, hey, I'm breaking into comics, right?
Oh, yeah,
so
totally, yeah.
Saying, like, one of the things I want to do is encourage people to say, I think you can get yourself locked into a position where you're like, no one at one of the big companies is ever going to notice me, right? And that's not true, because you have everything. Like, you can't tonight make a movie. You can't. Okay? you can't round up the actors and get the coordinator and, go lock down your locations. It's expensive and it's time consuming. You can't, like make a TV show. You can make a comic book tonight.
Yeah, it's true.
Either you can write, draw it yourself, or you can get a buddy to draw it, or you can write whatever, and you can put it on the web, and then you can start to push that
Build
out.
an audience, yeah.
Right, and that's that value proposition. I don't think people recognize that in the direct market relative to the people who want to break in.
Right.
That you can hand me a business card at a convention, and I can go back to my computer and go on the web and read your comic.
Do you do that when people give you their cards?
I look at everything.
Cool.
I mean, you would be shocked.
Awesome.
Like, I will sit at the airport with a stack like this, and I'll just, I'll go right into the bin with the stuff that goes, and I take the stuff that I think is significant, and I who knows what Jeff Smith you're going to find in the stack.
That's true. Have you discovered, what have you discovered? I guess you discovered Eric, right?
Eric's the example that I give relative to very recent and I think very direct, relative to there's nothing in the process that's anything that people haven't done before and haven't done hundreds of times. And it was just a very simple, clear process that was successful.
Cool.
Yep.
And he's writing. Is he doing anything else for you after this, or
I'm not current on what his next project is. But,
okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there, guys? Over here, back in the.
Mr.
Here.
Starkings.
I just want to know how you feel the success of Two Guns has impacted the company. Because you said, the boom started to look the way you wanted it a year ago, which significantly.
Oh, interesting. It's interesting. It's not so much the corollary of that. We had a good year last year in print, and so it was more of like getting enough manpower to not be in a place where, you're bleeding from the head every single day with all the things that you can't get done. My to-do list last year became manageable instead of a complete disaster. So, relative to Two Guns, the immediate impact on the company is we have a 20th Century Fox First Look deal. And there's a direct relationship between the movie being made and a film studio saying, you look like a really cool repository of content that we could mine for films. But other than that, I think, the studios, the joke is, and this is a little too glib, is, you print a comic book, you buy a safe, you put the comic book in a safe, you dig a hole in your backyard, you bury it, and in the morning the agents find it. So, you've lived it.
Yeah.
So, they're voracious for comic book content, and there's excitement for that. For me, I feel like it's more of a gatekeeper. I feel more like I'm the guy that shows up with a shotgun. It's like, oh, so you want to date my daughter? So, I'm going to give you a background check that's like what the CIA does when somebody wants to join the CIA.
Has it impacted you in terms of, do they want more of the same? Do you feel like there's an expectation now of what you produce?
No, relative to, I don't think that it was, I think it got us into the conversation. And I don't think we've been prolific enough that people look at us and say, that's a sustainable brand relative to, Marvel. Like, when Marvel went and did, when they had X-Men and Spider-Man made by other studios, people used to say in the town, well, those are great characters, but, everybody knows what the X-Men are, and everybody knows who Spider-Man is, so it's no surprise that it's a success. Now these crazy guys want to go do Iron Man. Nobody knows who Iron Man is. Watch them fall flat on their face. Oh, and they want to do it with this, an actor who's really hard to insure.
Out of rehab.
and then they had that huge success, but even then, people were skeptical that they could sustain it. But then, after Captain America launched, they were like, oh, that's a brand. So, you look at, that's like 20 years worth of work for Marvel to get to a place where people feel like they had it, For us, we're just getting started.
Play questions over here.
How do you keep it from becoming something like, I guess, like techno comics or radical, which are so obviously enmeshed in trying to find a studio, or recording studios to make them, to turn their projects into movies?
Well, techno comics was started by the people who founded the Sci-Fi Channel. And Radical, I think, has been very transparent in their desire to make films. And at times their disinterest in the comic book publishing business.
They go straight to movies now. They don't even make the comics anymore. They're oblivion.
Yeah, well, Barry has done interviews where he's very specific about, comic books is not his background, and so I'm not trying to say anything negative about that. At the end of the day, I think that I like to focus on the things I can control, because there's a lot in life that you can't. And one of the things I can control is I can control what we publish and focus on that. And then if there are these other things that happen that originate out of it, I might be wrong, but I personally believe that if good things originate out of what you publish, it's because you put your heart into it and because you cared about it. And I believe in the power of good stories. I believe that people get excited by them. I think that Stephen Grant is a phenomenal talent. Mm-hmm. I think criminally under-recognized in my book. I think that the story of Two Guns is magnetic because it's the story of, I think it's very timely relative to the things that are going on with the NSA and a lot of our intelligence operations that are happening in the War on Terror, where there's a lot of evidence that the intelligence operations of this country deal very callously in human cost. Mm-hmm. And it's a story about how two guys got caught up in a system that betrayed them, and that they dug in their heels and they fought it and they win. And I think that's at the core is a story that's worth telling. And I think if you do that, the analogy I would make is there's a lot of bands that are like, they want to go write a hit. Mm-hmm. Right? And what they say in the music business is that when you want to go write a hit, you can't do it.
Right.
Like, if you focus on doing a song that you care about, that you put your heart into, then magic happens. And, to a certain degree, the discussion today is about creativity and how creativity is manifest. And I don't know. I've been doing Boom for 8 years, mm-hmm. and I don't know. All I know is I just try to do the things that I see when things come across my plate and I get excited about them. I try to focus on that. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you focus on that, no matter whether you're a writer or an artist or a publisher, whatever you do, good things happen.
And it seems like, too, like just talking to you today, it seems like you're still able to, because it sounds like, number one, you read a ton of stuff. Like you're going after a convention, you must be tired, the big bag of comics, but you still get excited about stuff. It seems like.
It's like a commitment, like, and this is a bit more of my life philosophy of, there's a lot of things to be upset about. Mm-hmm. Okay, and like a lot of great art comes out of being upset. So I'm not saying don't be upset. Right. But just relative to what I need to get my work done and to do the things that I need to do to execute so that my wife can have, my child can have dinner tonight, right? Is like, I'm not going to look at all the frustrating stuff, and I'm not going to be upset about that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the fact that I'm living a life that people dream about, right? Because I get to do what I love. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to attack that with zeal, and I will never take it for granted. Because I've seen people take it for granted, and I've seen people lose it. And so I need to be committed to that and like hold it in esteem and not take it for granted and take it seriously. And so conventions for me are an opportunity to re-plug into what made me excited about the business. Like you said, remembering me digging around in back issues of conventions, and I make a commitment to go do that. I take time at every show where I'm going to go out and I'm going to revisit 12-year-old Ross Richie.
And that was the Shrine, everybody. That wasn't like WonderCon. Yeah, that's keeping it real. Totally.
Yeah, and I have a garage full, much to my wife's disappointment, of comic books.
Part of your lifeblood, man.
Yeah, well, that's what puts a roof over their head. So at the core of it, for
try
me,
that when I get home.
But it's like, you have something that sparks your excitement. It's a song, it's a movie, it's a TV show, it's a comic book, whatever it is. Tap into those things and get renewed, because at the core of it, when you recommit like that, great things happen because you're excited. And the thing I love about Boom is we're different from Valiant, and I'm friends with those guys and I have tremendous respect for what they've done. I think it's extremely hard.
But they have a set group of characters. Like, if you publish Valiant and you don't publish X-O Manowar, you're going to hear about it. Right?
You're not coming in with anything brand new.
Yeah. Well, they can. Maybe they do. I'm not. But I'm saying, like, you have to do X-O Manowar, and you have to do these stable of characters. Like, you have to do Harbinger. You have to do Bloodshot. Right? That's not true, though. Like, tomorrow we could create a publishing schedule that doesn't have anything of what we're doing today, and I love that because it forces us to refresh and rebuild and rethink. And I always talk about at the company building a better mousetrap. It's like, when you come into work today, how do you look at your set of skills? Like, as the company grows and gets bigger, and my joke is the name of the company isn't Whimper, like, we're not going to get smaller, right? So,
blow up.
Right, we're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So your set of skills is not going to survive. Like, when we were doing 8 monthlies, when we went to 12 monthlies, whatever your technique of managerial technique of like being an editor or whatever it was, we increased the production by 50%. So whatever your techniques are, they don't work.
So you don't hire new people to like take on an extra load. It's like
well, but as you grow the organization, the people that are at the top, they're like my editor-in-chief does less day-to-day editing this year than he did last year, and that will continue relative to the fact that as you put more and more books underneath him, right, he has to focus more on the big picture stuff. And it's the same thing's true for me and for my head of marketing and all the my head of finance and all these guys that do these things. And what I love is I love the band U2, and their 2 big albums are Joshua Tree and Octoon Baby. And Octoon Baby sounded so completely different than Joshua Tree, and everybody said, tell us about this new album. This was 25 years ago. But tell us about this new album. And Bono said, Octoon Baby is the sound of 4 guys chopping down the Joshua Tree. And it was, we went into this album and we recorded everything that sounded like Joshua Tree, we took it and we threw it away. And I was always like, wow, if you have that kind of rigorous mind with, I'm not going to just do the same old, even though it's working for me. Right, like how do I reinvent my toolkit? How do I? And I think when I look at Keith Giffen, to go back, that's a guy that completely changes. The guy that did the Funny Justice League is not the same guy that did the Legion of Superheroes. Is not the same guy that did Lobo. Is not like I just go over and over and over again with how the guy's completely changed his toolkit. Yeah. And I think it keeps it creative and fresh. And Keith's a guy in his 60s. How many guys in their 60s have been working in comics for 35 years?
I mean,
you can count them on one hand.
Yeah,
and there's a reason for that.
I think we have a hand back there, or no, okay.
Just a gesture.
Any question over here, Cassidy?
Yeah, you might not have to deal with it at Boom, but if someone's pitching you a comic and say they've got to fund it on Kickstarter, is that something you look at in a positive way or a negative way?
I would personally just look at the content. Yeah. And so I get excited, I'm an entrepreneur, so I get excited about new ways to do things. And this is all completely my own, the caveat is it's my own opinion. Like, I think what's exciting about Kickstarter, it goes back to the conversation about doing work on the web that garners an audience. Kickstarter is a great way to get pre-orders. In essence, you have X number of people who've committed to buy this at cover price. So, excuse me, of course I'm looking as a publisher, because I'm like, wouldn't it be great to sell things for retail instead of for wholesale, because your margins are 50% more. Right.
Especially in most comics are like $4, but Kickstarter you get like $10 for it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's a great.
It's true. Yeah. Or a PDF.
Right, for a PDF, exactly. But I think it's a great tool, and so I'm not going to look at it negatively. I don't know about my competitors, and I love them, but I don't care what they think, because it doesn't affect.
So it's all about the content.
Yeah. I mean, a good idea is a good idea is a good idea. Good comic's a good comic.
Questions?
So, as far as talent coming to Boom, found the one writer his way. What, artists the same way, or pencilers or inkers or colors? Is it?
I think artists are easier relative to we can look at artwork very quickly and tell. And so the example that I would give in the same vein is I did a portfolio review probably 5-6 years ago at WonderCon, and Rasan Ikidal, who is now the guy doing what's the Top Cow book? It's
Oh,
Matt
is it-
Hawkins is writing. It's black and white. Think Tank.
Yeah.
It's the artist on Think Tank. And Rasan walked up to me for a portfolio review. I looked at his stuff. I was like, this guy's like, I gave him work. That was a Saturday. He was drawing for Boom on Monday. So I think the panel composition, storytelling, rendering, all those things are like lightning clear very quickly. It's not clear that you can make a deadline. So I think on that end, producing work, the two things that as an artist that you need to do is you need to do panel continuity. If you're coming to the portfolio review and you don't have panel continuity, don't get in line for me, because you're wasting both of our times. And I love you, but nope. Okay? Because you got to draw comic books. There's a guy tweeting me this weekend who was like, hey, I want you to publish me. I'd be a great cover artist. I'm like, every single artist in the business wants to be the cover artist. You get to draw the big image and you don't have to do any of the hard stuff? Yeah, I want to be a cover artist. You know? It's like you have to do the panel continuity. And let's see, so to that end, Facebook has an artist submission area for Boom. So you can go take your stuff. I guarantee you, there's going, like, my poor heartbroken Boom editors with their cup of coffee in the morning and their bloodshot eyes with like, oh my God, I need an artist. God, where am I going to find somebody like this? So they're sitting there clicking through on the Facebook forum, so you can just upload your images just like you would on Facebook, and those are.
So it's a Boom forum on Facebook for
focus
artists to-
specifically. It's it's the
Cool.
Boom artist submission page. It is. Just like Zombie Tales, guess what it's about? It's the Boom artist submission page.
Trying to think, is there an acronym there, but not really. BAP?
I like it. Boom's BAP.
We didn't. Oh, over here.
Well,
Yeah.
so how do you, so you've given a couple of examples, but how do you prefer like pitches to come across your desk?
Right. So, at the core of it, we can't, so the blind submission process is archaic. The Boom submission process does not have a blind submission process. Now, giving you tips about how to pitch is a different conversation. So let's get into that. So the things that you need to, I will tell you from the other side of the desk, from hearing good pitches from people that do it in a really creepy way, that then you're like, oh wow, if it's this hard to work with you right now, it's really gonna get worse. Right? So, you have to sort of, I believe you have to like visualize success to figure out what the steps are to get it there. So you just think about the way that you want to be pitched, right? You don't want to be pitched in the bathroom.
Does this happen to
Seriously,
you?
of course. Yes. You don't want to be pitched in the bathroom. You don't want to. That tells me somebody doesn't have a sense of propriety. Okay. You don't want to be pitched at the hotel bar. You don't. You know what you're doing at the hotel bar? You're like,
You're winding down.
yeah. It's like not. Oh, I got to get my shields up, and who's this person, and now I got to navigate all these things. You want to be pitched in a very simple and succinct way that's professional. It's clear. Okay, and you want it to be sort of like there's a line that's hard to understand between I don't want all the detail, because what you want is you want to be interesting enough that I can ask a question, right? So it's like the example would be, this is a story about every guy on Earth dies, okay, except for one dude. He doesn't know why he's the only guy, and he has to go on this journey to find his sister. Okay, then it'd be like, oh, well, do you know why he's the only guy? And you could go like, I haven't figured that out yet. I'd be like, okay, cool. So is there like a lot of action and punching? Are there robots? Is it aliens? You'd be like, no. There's like nothing, so now I can ask questions either on email or in person. And so being the guy that's like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. You know, like when you talk to your like 5-year-old nephew, and he's like, and then, you know, you're just like, oh man, when is this guy gonna shut up? You know, it's like you need to have sensitivity about, you know, people's receptiveness. And the other thing is sort of like, you know, I'll give you a good example for. There's a guy that's writing for DC right now called, his name is Van Jensen. And Van was a journalist who wrote articles for the comic book business. And so I'd known Van professionally through that. And we were at HeroesCon one year, and he came up to me and he had a mini comic that he did that was called Pinocchio Vampire Slayer. We get this, right? We understand this is not
I wonder what it's about.
Yeah, exactly. Tells a bunch of lies and stakes a vampire. Yes, this is the this is not me making fun of it. This is the comic book. So, so he came up and he was like, "Hey, Pinocchio Vampire Slayer," and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool. Yeah, I will never publish this in a million years, but it's an awesome slave labor graphics comic.
Yeah.
You should submit it to slave labor graphics." He did, and they published it. You know, and so one of the other things is like, you know, I'm not picking on Van, but like, if you look at what we don't do that,
Yep.
right? And so part of it is being targeted. You know, like there are the guys that like the Aspen style is very clear, and I'm friends with those guys, and they're super talented and amazing. But it's like the guy that clearly should be drawing for Aspen Comics shouldn't be in the portfolio line at Boom.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So it's like, it's a little bit of like, okay, let's look at the industry and let's see where are my kindred spirits, where are the people that would understand what I do. You know, and for Van, it was a great stepping stone. He did Pinocchio Vampire Slayer, he got a lot of good press for it, he knuckled down, did a second one, I think they made $1, right? But it was a good stepping stone, and then, you know, he was able to parlay that into DC stuff, I don't know how, but it basically got him in the pool and he got to swimming. And so it's sort of like, just the simplicity of being professional enough to sort of look ahead and understand who the different publishers are and what their roles are, so that you're not, you know, as a creative person, don't set yourself up for failure. Lots of failures coming your way. I failed enough for like 12 lifetimes. Like,
There might be some more. I mean,
yeah, I have the broken bones to show it. But and so it's part of failure is the failures teach you, right? But you want to minimize as many of them as you can. So if you're the guy that's like, you know, a superhero guy, and you're in line at Boom, you're at the wrong place. I mean, maybe 5 or 3% of what we've ever published is like a superhero material. So go get in the Valiant line, or even Aspen has more in common with superhero work than we do. So, yeah, set yourself up for success.
David, you got something?
Oh, I have one more. The single most annoying thing that will make me want to punch my monitor, okay? After I've said, this is cool, this is awesome, it's not what we do, saying, can you point me to somebody who does? The answer is no, right? Because I don't hang out with my competitors, because they're my competitors, right? So at the core of it, there's a degree to which you need to figure out how to go break into their compound. It's not my job to break you into their compound. Right?
I always recommend, you know, people pick up a copy of previews, and because that's, I mean, you know, like people ask me, do I read comics? And I say, no, I don't. I read previews. I don't need to read comics. I read previews. But you can kind of see the landscape of, you know, what IDW does, what Boom does, and what everybody, and then, you know, whatever your project is, you know, pitch it to them. Hopefully they like it, and if it doesn't work, then pitch it to Boom. And if that doesn't work, ask Boom.
Do nothing with what this means. I don't know who he is.
Yeah, you wanted to talk about your biggest mistake earlier, and we haven't talked about. Didn't you say you know, mistakes or failures?
I talked about failures. Yeah, sure. No, I mean, let's see. It's there's a bunch of different. There are so many failures. I don't know where to begin. I'm not kidding. So you know, it's just there's lots of projects that you talk about. Certain things don't work,
Right.
And there's a lot of stuff that you put your love and your heart into, and it just dies right there and dies in front of you. It's painful and it's tough. And like one of the easier ones to talk about is Boom Kids. So I think it's important, no matter what your gig is, that you have to live in reality, and you have to be strong and courageous enough to recognize and change if your techniques are not working. And I remember being at the Toronto Fan Expo, and we had just published the first issue of The Muppets. And there was a guy in his mid-20s who walked up to the booth, saw the Muppets comic, got visibly excited, and then saw the logo in the corner that said Boom Kids and got visibly depressed and walked away from the booth. And I thought, oh, this guy's not buying this comic book because it says kids. So then I was like, oh, we need to change the name of this imprint to Kaboom, so that it doesn't say this is only for kids. It was never conceptualized like that, but I was trying to figure out how to keep it Boom branded while still designating what it was. So like that, that's a good example. Like Boom Kids didn't work
as a retailer too. You know who hates to read kids comics? Kids. They hate
thinking
that like, oh, this is for like when kids come in and they want to read Spider-Man. There's Superior Spider-Man that Doc Ock is inhabiting Peter Parker's brain, and there's Ultimate Spider-Man, which is in all ages section. I'm like, yeah, check out this, and then, this is for kids. It's like, no, this is for all ages. I love this book, and kids hate being talked down to. So kudos to you, and dude, kudos for picking up Hero Bear and Kid and putting that back out to us.
It's an honor.
Yeah. Any other questions out there, guys?
Going easy on it.
Yeah.
You touched a lot about like being the guard of creative content for Hollywood, but I think one of the things that Boom does well is like adapting TV and film properties, and still, it's like really enjoying Sons of Anarchy.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
yes.
And a lot of times you see like TV or film, adaptations and comics that are just sort of like they never capture the spirit of the original property, which I think is something that you do very well.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. And it's in particular with SOA, I was able to meet the creator Kurt Sutter, and like there's a degree to which I am just sort of like my mom's kid, where I'm like, I just don't want to embarrass my mom, where it's like, if I'm going to come in and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to look you in the eye and like, you created this, and it's like, the ratings on FX are just like through the roof, and each season it gets bigger and bigger. It's a huge commercial hit. It's like, I don't want to be the jackass that like you don't want to talk to, And so there's a degree to which I think that we feel emotionally beholden to these people that have given us these amazing things. And I think that there's a desire that we want to show them that we could do something that they can be proud of. And so, with Planet of the Apes, that's a situation where I grew up with those films, I had a Planet of the Apes lunchbox when I was in kindergarten, And so being a part of that on a pop culture, we all dream, right? And it's like, where do you want to be when you sign for the Planet of the Apes license? It's like, there's going to be a book someday, and it's going to have all the Planet of the Apes memorabilia in it, right? What if we're good enough that there's a couple of pictures of our stuff in there? We're probably not going to get a chapter, right? Because they're going to spend that on the action figures, the Mego stuff, or there's a lot of really great stuff.
Spoken like a true fanboy.
Yeah. But at the core of it, it's like that's kind of where you sit there, and I know that's what drives us. And at the end of the day, the other piece of it is it's like, since you're going to give we're all going to look back 20 years from now, and we're going to say, man, what did I do? And you're to a certain degree going to want some of those days back, right? And it's like, if you can look back and say, you didn't do just another piece of merchandise, at some level it's all commerce, and there's nothing wrong with that. And at some level it is another commerce, it is another piece of merchandise. But at the core of it, if you can have some meaningful part of that legacy that was bigger than you, then then on some level you contributed to that relative to you wanted to be a part of the team. Like maybe they didn't throw you the ball, but you got on the field, And so that's kind of our perspective. So I really appreciate you saying that. It means a lot.
It's different from, like, your perspective is different from Eric Stevenson's, who I guess ruffled a bunch of feathers last week when he said Star Wars comics and all that stuff isn't real comics.
Look, here's the thing. Eric is really a brilliant guy, and the business is lucky to have Eric. If you look at what he's done with Image and publishing, it is so incredible. You know, where they were on a market share basis when he took that company over and where they are now is a direct result of the choices and the things that he's made. And so he's a very, very smart guy. Eric is in a place as the official spokesman of Image where he can say something negative about licensed comics because they don't do them. Mm-hmm. And when he does that, what he does is he creates a conversation. So like today, we're getting together and I'm spending 95% of the time talking about Boom. Mm-hmm. But there's this part in this conversation where now Eric Stevenson's in the room.
Right, he's here. Yeah,
right? Because he threw a brick through a window.
Yeah, right? I mean, there's something to be said for ruffling feathers. I think, you know, it's good.
And I think it's brilliant because what he did was he took out this guy, like if one of my employees did that, mm-hmm. you know, I would call them on the carpet, you know, and say, hey, you can't go out and say something negative about our competitors, mm-hmm. right? That because at the core of it, they do really good stuff too. I'm friends with the guys at Dark Horse. I'm friends with the guys at DC and Marvel. And let's, you know, I'm more ecumenical in my perspective where I'm like, what we need is we need great comic books. Great comic books move the medium forward. It doesn't matter that Why the Last Man was published by Vertigo and today I'm talking about it. It moved the whole medium forward. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, where Eric is he's very, very commercially successful. And he's doing very, very well, and his Image partner bosses are in a place where they're all individually very, very, very successful. And so they're in a place where they can go take this brick and throw it through a window, and they can go cast aspersions at IDW and cast aspersions at Dark Horse and talk smack about superheroes and mm-hmm. say negative things about DC and say negative things about Marvel, and they can be the bad boys of comics, and they can stir it up, and there's no repercussions for what they do. And so part of it is, when Eric says those things, he has no downside.
Right.
So he's really not risking anything, right? And so to me, it's not risky, you know, because he's not going to get fired Monday, right? No. And so at the end of the day, and what he's saying is, if he gets 10% more people that are fans that are like, look at Eric, he's being a badass, mm-hmm. like. You know, screw the man, right?
Right.
No one's going to buy less Walking Dead because he says that Star Wars comics are not real comics. Right. So, to me, it's brilliant. What he did is very, very smart.
Well, you got people talking about him and Image, and you know, like you said, here we are.
He's stirring it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think Star Wars, Brian Wood's Star Wars comic is pretty good. So.
Yeah, Brian Wood's a very talented writer, and look, there's a lot of very, very talented people. You know. When you talk about licensed comics, I grew up reading Micronauts. That book was huge to me. Michael Golden is one of the greatest comic book artists we ever had. By the way, who else worked on that book? Gil Kane, Steve Ditko, Howard Chaykin, Pat Broderick. There's a Hall of Fame group of people that worked on that. To say that what they did is not significant, and maybe you just don't like the comic, that's fine.
How the hell did Micronauts and Rom the Space Knight last so long?
Because they were good.
I know. But it's like, you know, the toys were like 6 months shelf life, and then 75 issues of Rom the Space Knight.
Because the creators cared, and it was Bill Mantlo. And you know, like,
it's good stuff. I know it's
cool. Own that entire run.
Yeah. But Bill Mantlo didn't treat it like it was a toy line. Bill Mantlo put his heart into telling the story. And you know, it's the same thing with the Star Wars comics, where it's like, the original Marvel run of Star Wars, let's tick off the Murderer's Row. Walter Simonson, one of the greatest inkers we've ever seen in the business. Tom Palmer. There's Howard Chaykin again. Dave Stevens inks the backgrounds.
Golden again.
Michael Golden, Terry Austin. I mean, it's
Al Williamson.
It's ridiculous. The people that worked on the Marvel Star Wars books are Louis Portasio, insanely talented.
Oh yeah, he was an inker towards the end, wasn't he?
Yeah. So.
Those issues look terrible, though, I thought. I mean,
I've never read them.
Oh, they're awful.
Mike, Eric Stevenson just texted me. He said you wasted all your money on all those Star Wars. And you really should have bought 2 copies of every Image comic.
Oh, shucks. Let them know I have every issue.
I think he just ran up to the store, picked up a brick, and threw it through the window.
Well, we'll have to talk about that because I have a lot of Image comics here on the shelves that would need protection.
There's a lot of great Image comics. Eric's a very smart guy.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna wrap it up shortly, but are any good questions out there before we?
I just want to actually address, Ross, you said you suck as a writer.
Yes, I'm terrible.
But I didn't find out that you adapted to Android's Dream, Electric Sheep, until I was a few issues in, and I worked very closely with that material, and I have to say that your skill in adapting that material and your understanding of what makes a good comic as opposed to what makes a good novel was excellent.
That's incredible. That means a lot to me. That's very, very kind.
I have all those too. Those are good.
To give you some context for what he's talking about, so when we did the license for Do Android Dream of Electric Sheep, the Philip K. Dick novel, which is the basis for Blade Runner, the way that the license worked was, back in the day when they made the Blade Runner movie, the film company who bought Do Android Dream of Electric Sheep, they bought all adaptation rights. So that means that if it's a radio play or they wanted to make a stage play, they got all of those rights. They didn't get just the film rights. And so when the estate of Philip K. Dick came to us and said, hey, do you want to make a comic book out of this book? They said, here's the asterisk footnote is, you can't change anything at all, period. So we had to do word balloons, which was like Deckard speaking, and then there would be a caption box that said, he said, because we couldn't delete them. Okay.
Wow.
And so when that was first presented to the company, my staff was like, yeah, that's impossible. And I was like, no, I'm a nerd. I don't know if this is shocking, but one of the eras that I really love in comic book publishing is the late 60s and the early 70s, when the business is trying to figure out how to make a graphic novel. And there's a number of experimentations in the form. Gil Kane did His Name is Savage and Black Mark, where what he was doing was trying to take all the dialogue out of the word balloons and put them in running along the bottom of the panels to maybe make it more of an illustrated book that has several panels.
Chandler,
that's great. I was about to bring that up. Of course, there's Will Eisner's work was really the guy that got it right. But at the core of it, there was a lot of experimentation in the form, and I thought, wow, this could be this really cool throwback to that era, because I enjoyed those comics and bought them and collected them. And I thought, well, if we create this thing that it's a bit of a hybrid between a book and a comic book. And so I commissioned an artist to do a quick layout overnight, and we threw together a lettering sample that Richard didn't do, but it was just sort of done on the back of a napkin to try to kind of show the estate what it would look like. And what was exciting was they wanted it to be creative, and they thought they weren't scared by it, and they thought it was really cool, and so we got the license. And so then once we started to do the work on it, the staff was like, yeah, sitting down and taking a novel and turning it into a comic book, we don't know how to do that. And I was like, okay, well, the old guy is going to show you how it's done. So I said, I'm not going to force anybody since nobody wants to do this, and I'll do it myself on the weekends. So that's what he's referring to. So thank you.
You guys did Dust to Dust too, which is is that a sequel or what was that?
Yeah, prequel. Yeah.
So you were allowed to. How did you loophole that?
Well, it was interesting because when you have these conversations with people, I'll relate it to 28 Days Later. It's like when you go in to have a conversation, you don't know what you're dealing with, right? And so you'll start, maybe I'll loop it into the Big Trouble in Little China conversation because we have that book coming out, right? So, this comes back to coming into a room and sitting down across from Kurt Sutter. It's like, you're at John Carpenter's house. You're sitting there and looking at John Carpenter. Don't be an idiot. Right? So you have this moment, you say to John, you're like, John's like, hey, ask me any question you want. And I'm like, okay, let me know if I step on your toes, but I'd love to know in your conceptualization is there any such thing as Big Trouble in Little Tokyo? Is that possible? And Carpenter was like, no. It's like, okay, so it's only Big Trouble in Little China. He was like, yeah. And then we started to parse where the Little Chinas could be. I don't want to give everything away, but in these conversations with the Philip K. Dick estate, it's like you go, okay, please don't punch me if I accidentally step on your toes, but where do you view the continuity? How do you see, is there more stories you tell with Deckard? No, you don't want to do that. Okay, you know, is there possible to tell the stories of the, and now I'm not going to be able to remember what the war is called, which is what we did in the prequel. But they were like, yeah. And so you take those opportunities. With 28 Days Later, for me it was, and I'm going to screw this up, this is great because it's being recorded and I'm not going to be able to remember, but the bicycle messenger in the original 28 Days Later was less interesting to me. He felt like if we did continuing stories with him, he was more of a conventional film protagonist where it was like, hey, I'm a bicycle messenger, and by the end of the story, I'm a zombie fighter, right? I was more intrigued with her, you know, and I was like, she's this badass that, like, if you see a silhouette of a woman with a machete, you know who that character is, right? And I want to know more about her. And so when we had that original licensing conversation, I was like, what if we go with Selena, and what if we make the comic book about Selena? And then they came back with, that would be cool because we don't know what she's doing in the sequel. So if we can tell the story about what she was doing before the sequel, and we could finish the 24th issue with where she is during 28 weeks later, and I was like, well, that's fantastic. So if you can
work out.
Yeah. So it's those kind of conversations that you want to have, where you want to be in a place where it's, you know, authentic and real. You know.
What does the future hold for Boom? What do you guys see happening in the next year, 2 years, 5 years?
I think, you know, it is. We've had a lot of success this last year with original content, you know, and I think that you'll see us really doubling down on that. And I think Boombox is a new initiative I'm really excited about, and I think it's a fresh voice. You know, you look at a book like Lumberjanes, which the first issue orders were very strong. That's a book that shouldn't work in the direct market. And I think it represents a bit of a generational shift as for who the audience is. And so I'm excited about, this is going to be an esoteric thing to explain. I think we're living in a post-Tumblr world.
Okay, you have to explain that to me.
So I think what Tumblr did, when Tumblr first came out, I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's a blogging platform, I've already seen that. And what I didn't understand is its ability to share images easily is contagious and viral. And I think what's happened with Tumblr is that a lot of artists that ordinarily wouldn't have gotten their work seen because their style wasn't conventionally direct market have proliferated because they drew Batman, and a lot more people saw it through Tumblr because it was easily shared. And I think this artistic style that's even being published at the top with Marvel and DC is broadening. Like, you look at a guy like Francesco Francavilla, who has a very retro 1960s Italian brushwork, sort of Joe Kubert style.
Yeah.
He's old-fashioned, and yet he's now getting a lot of great work. Like, the styles are diversifying faster. I think the audience is more sophisticated with the different kinds of styles, and I think that we're trying to publish into that with Boombox and with Kaboom, and lean into these things that aren't the conventional direct market. Kind of like even the, you know, like Sons of Anarchy comic book is, you know, like people didn't think about that as a viable license. Nobody wanted it, you know, and it was very successful for us. So I always want to do the thing that's like, okay, we're going to have to do a certain number of things. Like when you hear Big Trouble in Little China as a comic book, you're like, well, duh, right?
Yeah.
So we'll do some of those things, but at the same time, it's like, how do we get to where somebody's not gone before? How do we do something that you go back and you go, Boom's the only company that could have done that? You know, like, I'm very proud of Kaboom. You know, I think that we've really created a space that other companies have been able to support and supplement, and now at retail across the nation, there's a place for kids comics, you know? And so it's like, the more that we could do things like that, that's, to me, is like, I can look back on that. Like, you know, I think that's one of the reasons that Paul Levitz came to us, was he has tried to do that through the years, and he saw that we did it, and he was very intrigued by that.
And he's going to be he is the creative director now, or what is Paul Levitz?
No. He's like a consultant, and what he is he's a member of our board.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And does he live out here now?
No, he's in New York.
He's okay.
Yeah, he will not move to LA
That's what
for all the money in the world.
So that's why DC moved here or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, I really don't know the inner machinations of all that stuff.
Cool. Question, Johnny.
How did you come with the name Boom for a company?
When I was working at Malibu, you know, when you're the young whippersnapper in the office, you think about, you know, doing your own thing. You know, your friends get together and have coffee afterwards, and you're like, hey, we should do this, we should do that. And I was trying to think of like a name that you could hang on some of these creative associations, and I just came up with Boom Studios back then, and I put it in my pocket, held on to it. Yeah, Malibu didn't get it.
Hey,
Not that they wanted
it is 6 o'clock. I'm gonna adjourn this meeting. I'm gonna figure out what date the next meeting will be. And dude, this was amazing. And again, and you know, I always love when I learn stuff at these things, and I learned a lot today. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey.
Man.